Welcome back everyone to Formula 1 Round 2 of the 2020 season, the first ever Styrian Grand Prix returning back to the Red Bull ring, and after yesterday's wet, damp, horrible qualifying session filled with drama, would today live up to not only the hype set from yesterday but also last weekend's fantastic first race of the season. As always, before we get into the race and before we get into spoiler territory, if you are new around here, feel free to subscribe if you want to keep up to date with all Formula 1 2020 news, reviews, all that good stuff. And just before we jump into the race result, this was your starting grid for the Styrian Grand Prix. It was Lewis Hamilton taking his first pole position of the season, alongside him Max Verstappen. Carlos Sainz smashed it in the wet conditions, out-qualifying last week's pole sitter Valtteri Bottas. Ocon impressed for Renault. Albon struggled in the wet conditions. Row 4, Gasly and Ricciardo. Norris and Vettel rounding out the top 10. Norris with a 3-place penalty from practice. George Russell lined up 11th. Could he squeeze into the points in the opening laps of the race? Lance Stroll was hoping to recover from a difficult qualifying in 12th. Kvyat was 13th, with Leclerc picking up a penalty during qualifying for impeding Danny Kvyat in 14th. Magnussen, Raikkonen, Sergio Perez, Latifi, Giovinazzi and Grosjean rounded out your grid. And going into the Grand Prix, plenty of questions. Would Russell be able to hold on to those points? Would Hamilton be challenged by the likes of Verstappen, Bottas, and those two racing points? How are they going to push through the field? Could they score points? Maybe even a podium? Well, spoiler warning out of the way, this is your result for the first ever Styrian Grand Prix. Lewis Hamilton taking his first victory of the season with Valtteri Bottas P2, the first 1-2 of 2020. Max Verstappen held on to third. He gave Bottas a good run for it and went on a two-stop strategy to try and get the fastest lap, but traffic put paid to that attempt. But first podium of the season for Red Bull Racing. Alex Albon picking up his first points of the season. Want to talk about him a little bit later on, because he came so close to having the same incident as last weekend with Sergio Perez, who had a great race, finished 6th, with Lando Norris overtaking him on the final corner. Perez, Stroll and Ricciardo, a photo finish reminiscent of the Piston Cup. All three of them between 1/10 of a second. I'm sure that's going to be coming up in highlight reels in the future. So close, all three of them. Perez just holding on after late contact with Albon. Stroll and Ricciardo were the other two that tried to just beat Perez over the line, but good points for both of them, who failed to finish last weekend's Austrian Grand Prix. Sainz, 2 points at 9th place finish, but also picked up the fastest lap of the Grand Prix, I believe to be his first ever fastest lap in Formula 1. McLaren still currently having all of the fastest laps of the 2020 season so far, and Danny Kvyat in the final points paying position, his first of the season. Kimi Raikkonen just missed out on points in a fight all race long, really, with Kevin Magnussen, Grosjean and teammate Giovinazzi. All four of them never really looked like challenging those top 10. Gasly really struggled on tyres, and after a great qualifying yesterday, did a two-stop strategy, soft, hard, soft, never really paid dividends. Russell just beating out teammate Nicholas Latifi, both of them 2 laps down, but at least this time both of them get into the finish. Ocon retired early on, and the two Ferraris made contact on the opening lap, and that is exactly where we're going to start today's rundown of the Grand Prix. I don't think any of us expected there to be big dramas today. We had plenty of dramas last weekend, and I think a lot of us thought it would be a little bit quiet today, but we hope for a few juicy moments, a few spicy moments, and that's exactly what we've got, with this pair colliding before we'd even got into Sector 2 of the second race of the season. Vettel had struggled on the start, bogged down, had actually dropped back not only behind George Russell but also Lance Stroll. And heading up to turn 3, while the rest of the field was relatively clean, there was Sainz trying to pass Verstappen, a little bit like Norris and Verstappen last weekend. It was that midfield where things were really starting to bunch up, and Vettel was trying to come back at Lance Stroll. There was Russell in the inside, and they were 3 wide. Then Leclerc behind, who'd got that penalty in qualifying and had to start a little bit further back on the grid. He tried to stick his nose in, and Leclerc was behind Russell. Russell just was able to get in front of both Stroll and Vettel, and Leclerc thought very last minute, I'm just going to put a nose in and try and make a move. Vettel had to turn in, he had nowhere else to go. Completely went to the apex, to the curb. Leclerc bumped over it, rear end just flicked up into the air. Back left tyre smacked into the back of Sebastian Vettel's rear wing. Vettel out of the Grand Prix instantaneously. No way they were going to be able to recover that Ferrari. Vettel did get it back to the pit lane, but the damage was way too extensive to be able to, well, fix really, and put a new rear wing on to get him back into the Grand Prix. Leclerc retired a few laps later thanks to the damage with Sebastian Vettel. Leclerc's floor heavily damaged, and I'm not too sure whether that was due to the contact with Seb. I think it was, because it was on that left side of Leclerc's car. But whether just the car violently being thrown up in the air thanks to that curb may have also done damage as well. But for Ferrari, we know last week, and we saw in qualifying, they just don't have the pace this year. All of the Ferrari-powered cars, Haas, Alfa Romeo, Ferrari, all struggling. Ferrari, though, did just squeeze a podium last week, and they are the one team of the three which you kind of feel would have been able today to be in and about that mix for that best of the rest title. 5th and 6th in the Grand Prix, if strategy had gone their way, of course, and incidents. However, taking yourself out on lap 1, yes, last week they got very lucky with that drive from Charles Leclerc, and I think qualifying yesterday and kind of the race today just proves just how mighty that drive was last week from Leclerc. But a big mistake from the Monegasque driver today leaves Sebastian Vettel down in 15th in the drivers' standings, and with a lot to do for both of them. Ferrari taking a big hit in the constructors as well today. This upgrade package they've supposedly got coming for next weekend, it's going to have to be good, because it's not looking good for Maranello. Esteban Ocon, your other retiree, was doing a really solid job actually in the early stages. 5th on the grid, great qualifying yesterday. Dropped back a little bit on the opening laps. Was in a brilliant fight with teammate Daniel Ricciardo. Ricciardo on an alternate strategy, starting on the medium tyres. Ocon on the softs. Had a great scrap for a couple of laps, but ultimately Ocon letting Ricciardo through to help out Ricciardo's strategy. And there was a moment there, and I'll talk about it when we get on to Daniel Ricciardo, where I kind of felt that Ricciardo was leaving the team. The team weren't very, I suppose, forgiving to Ricciardo. They wanted him to fight and get that move on Ocon, but Ocon was doing a solid race and was looking to pick up points once again, but a cooling issue quite early on in the race, 20 or so laps into the Grand Prix, retired, and that was that. But still, 4 points over the opening 2 weekends isn't dreadful, but certainly more was on the cards today. Latifi and Russell, the old Williams kind of came back a little bit today, completely in their own fight at the back of the field. Russell was doing a great job in the first couple of laps, but fighting with Magnussen put paid to that. Russell at turn 5, straight off into the gravel trap, lost a whole host of positions right down to the back of the field behind Latifi. Did a good job to get back up to Nicholas. Had a great fight with Gasly as well when Gasly was trying to recover. But Williams, not their best day. But again, at least their cars both finished, and it's not quite as bad as last season. The Gasman, who was just in front of the 2 Williams boys, I really felt for him today. Had to come in super early. Was one of the earliest, if not the earliest car to do a scheduled pit stop. Tyres weren't working, the soft tyres in that first stint. Went onto the hard tyres, the team hoping he could get it to the end. But also just weren't working, and he had a dreadful race here last year, being lapped by teammate Max Verstappen, and this year, despite qualifying being great, the race today really wasn't brilliant. However, last weekend, 6 points, I think will really help him out overall, but today's race, not good from the Gasman. Then it's this group of the 2 Hasses and the 2 Alfa Romeos. I'll talk about them together because they were kind of just one bubble on their own. Neither team realistically looking like they're going to be able to consistently challenge for points this season. Haas yet to score along with Williams. Alfa did get 2 last weekend, courtesy of Giovinazzi. And Magnussen and Raikkonen had some great fights during this race. Great side-to-side battles. And there were times where I was a little bit frustrated. I don't think we saw a single Grosjean or Giovinazzi overtake. But all 4 of them on that timing beam throughout the Grand Prix were swapping positions. But we were watching a Daniel Ricciardo onboard or a Lando Norris helicopter shot, which is fine. And for a lot of casual fans, they want to see that fight at the front and those big names. But the rate all four of them were changing. I just wanted to see a couple of more FOM, if that's okay with you guys. But Grosjean, actually, I will just mention, starting from pit lane, had a torrid day yesterday. Didn't do a single lap in qualifying. And after the opening couple of laps, had got himself up to 13th, thanks to the two Ferraris coming together, the likes of Perez and Raikkonen having to get out of the way of that carnage. Russell went off, and I was thinking, oh my God, Grosjean had done a really good job here. But the race pace of that Haas just really wasn't there. Grosjean having brake issues again today, locked up at the top of the hill, coming onto the team radio saying he needs to cool the brakes down. Magnussen having a similar issue, but at least they got both cars to the checkered flag this weekend. But both of those teams just, I think this season, are just going to need that little bit of luck on their side. They don't look dreadful, the two cars, in and about the pace of the AlphaTauris and that lower end of the midfield fight, but they just need that big upgrade on that Ferrari engine, and I'm not too sure it's coming. Danny Kvyat, P10. I don't really know what to say about Danny Kvyat. I think the quietest drive of anyone, because whereas his teammate was really struggling and had that two-stop strategy, and whereas the two Alphas and the two Hasses were constantly scrapping, Kvyat just got on with it. And we said last week, I think the AlphaTauri car are the bridge team, in the sense that they're just behind the likes of Ferrari, Racing Point, Renault and McLaren, but they're just a bit in front of Williams, Alfa Romeo and Haas. So they're always going to be the team that, if there's retirements, like we saw today with Ocon, Leclerc and Vettel, they're going to be the team that's going to be able to pick up the pieces. They did it last week with the Gazman. They've done it this week with Danny Kvyat, who managed to keep himself out of trouble. Contact with Ocon last week. Still haven't seen the footage of that, which would be nice. But just getting that 1 point on the board usually kickstarts a driver's season. But very clean today from Danny, and a solid job. The man in front of him, Carlos Sainz, was doing a great job in those early stages. Passed by Max Verstappen on that opening lap when they were fighting together. Passed by Bottas, passed by Albon. But then was that lead car for best of the rest in 5th place, until a big mistake in the pit stops cost him about 4 or 5 seconds. It was gone from a 2-second pit stop to a 7-second pit stop. Really not good. Lost out to Stroll straight away, caught in traffic, ultimately ending up at the back of that pack. Let Norris through with about 4 or 5 laps to go, came in, whacked on some fresh rubber and got the fastest lap. So in a race where he could have ended 5th, kind of unravelled, but has saved himself a little bit. And 3 points isn't dreadful when you consider how bad that pit stop kerfuffle was. And as of recording, this may change a little bit later on this evening, Lance Stroll is under investigation for contact with Ricciardo later on in the race, and maybe Sainz will gain 1 place, but I would highly doubt it, thanks to the gap between the likes of Ricciardo and Stroll and Carlos Sainz. But it was that fight, Stroll and Ricciardo, that was the fight pretty much for best of the rest, until Sergio Perez decided he was going to become Lewis Hamilton 2.0 and just overtake everyone in that midfield. Perez just went off after the Red Bull cars. He didn't want to fight in the midfield, did he? Great drive from Perez, and we'll get onto that in a moment. But Stroll just couldn't quite get past Danny Rick. But with 2 laps to go, went for a move, locked up, straight on. Ricciardo at the top of the hill, this was, turn 3. Ricciardo had to just get out the way, turn out of the corner, both of them wide, and Norris, bless him, just managed to sneak through. Thank you very much, he was saying in the cockpit. Managed to get past Danny Rick, did Norris, but Norris was still behind Lance Stroll. But both Ricciardo, Stroll, pretty solid races, I would say. Ricciardo, who was on that alternate strategy, made it work, but that soft tyre compound just wasn't quite to Ricciardo's liking in the latter stages. And the Racing Point car, I think we can all agree, is the 3rd best car, certainly on display today. And Stroll and Perez both did great moves throughout the field, both of them starting outside the top 10, both of them comfortably inside the top 10. And I think Stroll's only mistake was that move on Ricciardo. And apart from that, they had a great fight together, Perez and Stroll. But apart from that, both of them pretty solid. Sergio Perez, who just finished in front of Stroll in P6, could have been 4th place. Really could have. And there were some critics out there last week criticising Albon, saying that he should have waited with that contact with Hamilton. Well, Sergio Perez, a far more experienced driver, I think you can certainly say today, Probably should have waited, and I was not saying that about Albon last week, that's for sure. Perez just smashed it today, started 17th, rinsed the midfield, destroyed it. Like I said, he really did look like he was in one of the top 3 cars, and Racing Point today really proved that their decision to go this route with their car and design, so worth it, and got past the likes of Ricciardo, both of the Hasses, the Alfa Romeos, Alfa Tauris, got past Norris with relative ease and Carlos Sainz through the pit stops, and then caught up to Alex Albon, which I thought was really impressive, that he was able to reel in the Red Bull so quickly. However, he was stuck for about 10 laps or so on Albon and probably had the hurry up that he's running out of tyre life, laps running out. Went for a move at turn 4 where Albon went for the move on Hamilton. Perez on the inside, just like Hamilton, contact with the back of Albon, and Albon just held on. My goodness, what Alex would have been feeling then, thinking, oh my God, not again. But Alex just held on this time, managed to sail off into the distance, and Checo had front wing damage, which was just getting worse and worse as the lap went on. And ultimately, Lando Norris, who was 7th going into the last lap, nicked Ricciardo, that we just spoke about a minute ago, then passed Stroll at the end of the straight, got round to the final couple of corners, and there's Checo Perez going slowly. So Norris, from what was a difficult race in the early stages, managed to nick a P5, Perez P6, just beating Stroll and Ricciardo on the line. But that fight between that midfield group was the star of the show today. It was a hell of a lot of fun. And seeing all the different cars at different phases of the race really come into their own. The Renaults are really strong and the McLarens at the beginning, but then the Racing Points managed to get through. But then in the latter stages, the McLarens came back into it, throwing a bit of Albon for a bit more spice at the front of that fight. It was a hell of a lot of fun. But Norris ultimately coming out on top today and really cementing a really solid championship so far for Lando. But yeah, that midfield fight, brilliant today. More please. But the fight at the front, pretty much was pretty straightforward. Alex Albon, not his best race. I mean, he did what he needed to do, but consistently about 30 seconds behind that front 3, and that really did put Red Bull in a pickle when choosing strategy halfway through. Struggled yesterday, did a much better job last weekend, but Albon needs to do a little bit more, I think, over the course of this season. He's still got time, but Red Bull will have a few question marks out of today. Verstappen finishing in front of him in the end, but Verstappen gave it as good as he got. Great fight with Valtteri Bottas, trying to hold on to that second place. Ultimately to no avail, but that first stint did a great job just settling in between the two Mercedes, and then did put on fresh rubber at the end to go for fastest lap, but there was plenty of traffic and wasn't quite able to make it work. And the two Mercedes 1-2, Hamilton unchallenged at the front of the field, so close to a Grand Slam, but Sainz just nicking away that fastest lap, and Bottas doing exactly what he needs to do to keep himself in the running for the championship. But Hamilton faultless, Bottas, great fight with Verstappen. It was very easy for Mercedes today. Before we get on to driver of the day and race rating, the best bits of the weekend, your Drivers' Championship looks like this. Bottas holds on to the lead with 43 points, but Lewis Hamilton closing in now on 37. Lando Norris retains third place, 26 points for the British driver. Charles Leclerc drops down to 4th, but still not too bad considering today's race. Perez, Verstappen finally makes it into the top 10 with some points today. Sainz, Albon, Gasly and Stroll round out the top 10. Your bottom half looks a little bit more dismal for some drivers. Ocon and Ricciardo joint on 4 points apiece, 11th and 12th. Giovinazzi 13th, Kvyat 14th, Sebastian Vettel 15th place. Goodness me, not the start to the season he was hoping for. Latifi beats out all the other drivers, yet to score with an 11th place finish on race 1, 16th for him. Raikkonen, Magnussen, Grosjean and Russell all yet to score. Constructors, this is a bit more fun. Mercedes already running away with it. Over double McLaren's points in second place, but McLaren, great to see them up there and fighting. Red Bull scoring their first point of the season this weekend in third. Racing Point beating out Ferrari in fourth. Renault, Alfa Tauri and Alfa Romeo all score. Williams and Haas yet to do so. Williams beating Haas though, thanks to Latifi's 11th place in round 1. Driver of the day, driver of the weekend. Yesterday in qualifying, I gave it to Lewis Hamilton after a masterful performance. Today in the race, I've got to give it to Sergio Perez. Lewis Hamilton, my honourable mention. And as such, Lewis Hamilton is my driver of the weekend. What a stunning performance it was. And if anyone was doubting his championship challenge this year after race 1, I think race 2 has certainly put those doubters to bed. Race rating, last weekend we gave it a 9 out of 10. Spicy on the spicy scale. Today, not so much. It was a tasty race is what we've gone with. 6 out of 10. Nothing too crazy, but that fight in the midfield certainly enough to make it warranting above a 5 rating. Maybe I'm being a little harsh, maybe a 7 would be more warranted, I don't know. I'd love to know your driver of the day and race rating in the comment section down below. And just before I leave you this weekend and before we head over to Hungary, Formula 2 this weekend, wet race for the feature race. Sprint race, a little spicy as well. Lundgaard coming out on top, Ticktum and Armstrong the podium. Guan Yu Zhou, Ilott, Aitken, Galeo and Mazepin rounding out the points paying positions. For my driver of the weekend, I've gone with Christian Lundgaard. Did a great job in qualifying. Wet conditions in the feature race yesterday was so good, but a little mistake cost him a realistic chance of the win. But today in the sprint race, completely on his own, well-deserved Christian Lundgaard. The championship looks like this. Schwartzman, after that first feature race win, leads the way over Lundgaard. Only 5 points the gap between them. Ilott joint with Lundgaard. Ticktum, Armstrong, Guan Yu Zhou, Yuki Tsunoda, Drugovich, Delatraz and Mick Schumacher round out the top 10. And your rookie championship is Schwartzman and Lundgaard leading the way. Funnily enough, 6 of the top 10 are rookies, really impressing this season. And that is your lot for round 2 of 2020, the Styrian Grand Prix. I do want to quickly say, Formula 1 have done a great job. The Red Bull Ring, Austria, we really can't thank you enough. First of all, for race 1, which was insane, but both weekends, it's just been fantastic to have the sport we all love, we all wanted to return, and they've just done it. They've just done a really good job, so thank you everyone involved, Formula 1, people at the circuit, whatever. And that's your lot, guys. Thank you all for watching. If you are new around here, I would very much say consider subscribing if you want to keep up to date with all Formula 1 2020. Thank you all for watching. Enjoy the rest of the week, and we'll be back next weekend for the Hungarian Grand Prix.